Previously, you've watched a video lesson discussing the 6 steps to follow anytime you're using source material in your paper. This video tutorial is going to walk you through how to apply those steps when you are writing a paper of literary analysis. So there are the 6 steps listed there, and in this tutorial I'm going to add a 7th step. First, I want you to imagine that you're writing an essay in response to this prompt. Write a paper describing 3 traits shown by a character from a text we have discussed in class. So what you're going to do when you're writing a paper in response to that prompt is first focus in on the idea that you're going to discuss in your paper. So according to the essay assignment, what main ideas will be covered in your paper? Well, we know from the prompt the main ideas are going to have to do with a single character and that character's characteristics or personality traits. So this idea, the character traits, should be the central focus of your entire paper, and you want to keep that idea central in your mind as you are reading your sources and finding examples from the sources that are going to inform and support your claims. So, when you go to write your paper, you're going to state this main idea in your thesis statement and in your topic sentences. So this would be a sample thesis. In John Updike's A&P, Lingle may initially seem to be a harsh and uncaring manager. He does appear to lack much in the way of flexibility. However, he also demonstrates concern for the well-being of his employees. So we have kind of a 2-sentence thesis statement here. And each of the topic sentences are going to follow in this way. The topic sentence for one paragraph is going to say, Lingle is often viewed as a rigid authority figure. So that connects back with lacking much in the way of flexibility. This causes some to view him as uncaring and kind, so that gets at the harsh and uncaring manager idea. And then the other topic sentence will say something like this. Despite giving the impression of being harsh and inflexible, Lingle does demonstrate concern for others. So there we've stated the main idea in the thesis statement and the topic sentences. This video is going to focus specifically on the paragraph that would follow the topic sentence that reads, Lingle is often viewed as a rigid authority figure. So that's the idea that we're going to discuss in this paragraph, in this body paragraph. Now, once you identify Lingle as rigid, or you decide that that's one of the ideas that you're going to talk about, you probably need to give your reading audience kind of a fuller picture of what you mean by that term rigid. And of course, your definition is going to be informed again by the impressions that you draw after really reading the story carefully and looking for Lingle's characteristics. And after reading the story and looking at the different ways that Lingle acts and talks and how the other characters interact with him, this is the explanation. And that explanation is going to come right after the topic sentence. So again, the topic sentence says, Lingle is often viewed as a rigid authority figure. And then here's the explanation. Lingle's strict approach to managing not only his employees, but also the store's customers is clear throughout the story. It is especially obvious in one memorable scene. So, really primarily in this sentence right here, we get a little fuller explanation of what we mean by this term rigid or rigid authority figure. So, giving that explanation kind of helps the idea for this paragraph to become clearer for the reading audience. Now, we've identified the information in our sources that are relevant to the paper's main idea. And we've done that, as I said, by reading and annotating first and foremost our primary text, the story, but then also secondary sources as well. and we've gone through and identified or found the information that's relevant to this main idea of Lingle being a strict authority figure. Here's one of the ideas that we identified. He, that's Lingle, didn't like my smiling. As I say, he doesn't miss much, but he concentrates on giving the girls that sad Sunday school superintendent stare. Now, and I've noted that this is from page 35 of the story. This is working from a different edition of the anthology than we're using this semester. So the book that I was using at the time that I created this PowerPoint listed this quote on page 35. But whatever information you identify from your primary source, if you write it down or if you make a file containing your notes, be sure and put the page numbers in there, then you don't have to go look back and find them later. So there's one of the statements from the story that we identified that connects back with Lingle's personality or characteristic. And it does go along with the idea that he's a rigid authority figure. But when I'm looking at this passage, I want to find, I'm not going to use the whole passage because some of it isn't relevant to the idea of him being rigid. So like the part that says, I say he doesn't miss much and he concentrates on giving the girls. Like some of that language isn't necessarily relevant to the idea of him being rigid. But what I do want to find is what I like to refer to as the power words or power phrases that really drive home the idea that I'm trying to discuss. And then I include those power words in my paper. And I'm going to show you how you would do that. And let me just go back and point out that the power phrase to me that really sticks out is his sad Sunday school superintendent stare. That to me is a very vivid kind of comparison of Lingle to a Sunday school superintendent. And I'll tell you more about what to do with that phrase later, but that to me is the power phrase that I want to put into my paper. So how am I going to include that power phrase? Well, these are the steps. The next step is to introduce the quote, introduce the textual example. So I'm going to introduce my readers to the information from my source, to those power phrases. And the way that I introduce that information is to first give my audience the context. In other words, tell my readers what is happening in the story or whatever the literary text is in the section from which I'm getting ready to pull evidence. So I'm kind of walking my reader into the scene where that power phrase appears. And so this is how a writer could do that. During one of Sammy's regular workdays at the grocery store. So I'm letting the reader know that the event that I'm getting ready to describe happens on a regular workday. And then 3 teenage girls come in to shop. So I'm giving the reader, the readers of my paper, an idea of what's happening in this scene. But that's not all that happens. The girls catch Sammy's eye because they are clothed only in bathing suits. After the girls wander through the store for a while, the manager finally confronts them. So this is important because if I just throw in the phrase sad Sunday school superintendent stare, my audience is not really going to understand what leads up to that stare. So by providing this contextual information, I'm going to help my reader kind of get into this particular scene in the story. And you'll notice that so far I'm using kind of summary and paraphrase of this particular scene. There are no direct quotes in this introduction. And the other thing that I want to point out is that this introduction isn't just a signal phrase. It's a good 3 sentences of contextual information before I put that quote. And again, you're doing this as kind of a courtesy to your reader and as a way to guide your reader to your point so that your reader isn't having to guess at anything. So I've got that introduction, and then I'm going to take the power phrase from the quote that I showed you before, and I'm going to integrate that information or the quote into my own prose or my sentence. and that's going to look like this. So here's the introductory information, and then beginning here in red is the sentence where the quote is integrated into the sentence. When Lingle tells the girls that they need to be decently dressed, he also gives them a sad Sunday school superintendent stare. So when I went back and looked at the story, I also felt like this phrase decently dressed was important. So I've also integrated it into my prose. And one of the things that I hope that you notice is the quotation marks. Right here, you have double quotation marks. And what this indicates is that I'm quoting something that's actually in quotation marks in the original text, because the phrase decently dressed is something that Lingle says. So when it appears in the story, it's in quotation marks. So when I quote it, I'm using double quotation marks. So I've got two quotation marks here and then a single here and the same here. So that's how I need to punctuate this quote that is within a quote. But then when I come to sad Sunday school superintendent stare, that phrase is not in quotation marks in Updike's story because it's something that Sammy is thinking. So I don't need the double quotes here. I just need regular quotation marks. And using correct punctuation is an important part of integrating quoted material into your prose. Then, of course, the other important part of integrating quoted material is that after you've put the quoted material into your sentence, the sentence needs to read clearly and be grammatically correct. So we have an introductory element when Lingle tells the girls that they need to be decently dressed. Then you have the comma. And then we have your subject, he, and then we have your verb, also gives, and then them is the direct object, and then what he gives them, a sad Sunday school superintendent stare. So there, even though we have a quote, actually two quotes in this sentence, the sentence is still grammatically correct. And that's a very important part of integrating quoted material as well. Now, when I integrated the quote into my sentence, I'm using a combination of paraphrase and direct quotation. The paraphrase is when Lingle tells the girls that they need to be. That's paraphrase. Decently dressed is a direct quotation, then more paraphrase. He also gives them a, and then sad Sunday school superintendent stare. So there you're seeing an example of me mixing up my prose and direct quotations. And you also see me continuing to kind of remind my reader of what's happening in the story. So we know that he's saying something to the girls, but then we also know that he's looking at them a certain way. So again, we're kind of narrating the story for our reader using a mix of paraphrase and direct quotation. That's integrating the source's information into my prose. And then, of course, we need to add an in-text citation. That's always going to be important when you're using information from a source. So there is the in-text citation right here. And that, of course, is the page number from the story. I also want you to notice that the end of the quotation is punctuated right next to the word. Then we have the in-text citation, and there's no word page. In other words, it doesn't say page 35. You just have the page number. And then the period goes on the outside of the parenthetical citation or the in-text citation. There's no period here. So we've added our in-text citation. But again, we don't want our audience to be guessing at what these quotes reveal or show about Lingle's character. What does the sad Sunday school superintendent stare and telling the girls that they need to be decently dressed, what does that have to do with Lingle being rigid? Well, that's where we need to provide an interpretation. So we follow the direct quote, the quoted material, or sometimes a paraphrase, by interpreting or explaining the information, and we show how it relates to the paragraph's main idea. So we don't want to assume that our readers are going to understand why this information is significant. Spell it out clearly for our audience. Again, that's just an act of courtesy. It's being a good host. It's being a good teacher. It's guiding your readers through your logical process. And here's what that looks like. When Lingle tells the girls that they need to be decently dressed, he also gives them a sad Sunday school superintendent stare. So there's your quote. And then here's our interpretation. Here, and that here is referencing the information in this sentence. Lingle is glaring condescendingly at Queenie and her friends. That's really a paraphrase of the sad Sunday school superintendent stare. Lingle is glaring condescendingly at Queenie and her friends because they aren't abiding by the conventional dress code. This suggests that, and that phrase right here is really something that you're probably going to use a lot in your paper. The phrase "this suggests that," or "this reveals," or "this shows," or "this illustrates." That is a great phrase to begin any interpretive section with. This suggests that Lingle has an inflexible style of leadership, at least as far as Sammy is concerned. And again, the topic idea is that Lingle is rigid, so we reiterate the idea right here, but we use a synonym, inflexible style of leadership. So there we're interpreting this quote so that the reader understands why this quote, why these phrases are important. So after we've done all that work and followed all these steps, we put it together in an entire paragraph. So here we have our topic sentence, and the topic sentence is where you state that paragraph's main idea. Got that right there. Lingle is often viewed as a rigid authority figure. Then we want to introduce the quote. And let me back up and say part of the discussion of the idea is also this follow-up sentence. Lingle's strict approach to managing not only his employees but also the store's customers is clear throughout the story. All of that is kind of giving a forecast of what idea this paragraph is going to show. Then we're going to introduce the evidence. And we start with, it's especially obvious in one memorable scene, so we're letting our readers know we're going to look at a particular scene from the story. And then we've got these sentences of introduction that we talked about before. During one of Sammy's regular workdays at the A&P, 3 teenage girls come into shop. The young women catch Sammy's eye because they are clothed only in bathing suits. After they wander through the store for a while, the manager finally confronts them. There's the introduction right there. Then we're going to integrate the quoted material into a sentence. When Lingle tells Queenie and her friends that they need to be, quote, decently dressed, end quote, he also gives them a, quote, sad Sunday school superintendent stare. So there is the sentence that contains the integrated quoted material. Then, of course, we're going to provide an in-text citation. Now, the reason that I went ahead and put Updike's name here is because in the introductory paragraph for this paper, I've decided to quote a secondary source in my introduction. So when I refer back to Updike for the first time, I need to go ahead and give the author name again in my in-text citation. So we've got the idea. We've introduced the idea and the quote. We've integrated the quoted material or the power phrases into our sentence, and we've given an in-text citation. Now we need to interpret the quote. Here, Lingle glares condescendingly at the girls because they aren't abiding by the conventional dress code. This suggests that he, Lingle, has an inflexible style of leadership, at least as far as Sammy is concerned. So there again, we're reiterating that topic idea. He has an inflexible style of leadership. So just to go back and recap very quickly, what we just did is in that single paragraph, and in the process of studying the story and deciding what we're going to write about, we've figured out what the paper's main idea is going to be. We've stated it in our thesis and topic sentences. We explain it in the body paragraph. We've identified the evidence from our text and looked for power words or power phrases. Then we've included the evidence in our paper, probably primarily in our body paragraphs. We've introduced the evidence by giving contextual information using paraphrase and summary. And then we've integrated any direct quotes into our sentences with a combination of paraphrase and direct quotation. We've provided an in-text citation. And then we've interpreted this evidence and we've explained how it illustrates the main idea. Now, what I've given you is an example of doing this one time in the paper. And just that one instance of following all those steps takes up a good amount of one body paragraph. So to follow all of these steps effectively, you really need to give yourself plenty of space and plenty of sentences to do it within your paper. But you don't just do it one time. Every time you use information from a source in your paper, you want to follow all of these steps. Sometimes following those steps won't take as much space, and I want to show you an example of what I'm talking about. So this is the same paragraph walking through all those steps. Here's the last sentence that we read before. This suggests that he has an inflexible style of leadership, at least as far as Sammy is concerned. Now right here in this section, starting with as one critic explains, we're getting ready to include evidence from a secondary source, from a critical article on Updike's story. And we're going to follow those same steps. We're going to introduce, we've already identified the information from the source that we're going to put in our paper. We're going to introduce the power phrase that we want to use, and here's the power phrase right here. We're going to introduce it when we say, as one critic explains. And then we're going to integrate the power phrase into our sentence. And that happens in the same sentence. As one critic explains, Lingle represents the system, management, policy, decency, and the way things are. And that power phrase, again, kind of connects back with the topic idea of Lingle being rigid, kind of a rigid system that focuses on policing and managing people's behavior. Then we're going to give the in-text citation. In this instance, this is a digital source and there is no author for the source. So the works cited entry begins with A and P in quotation marks, and so that's what goes in my in-text citation. Whatever is first in the works cited entry is what goes in your in-text citation. And there are no page numbers because the critical article is a digital source that doesn't include page numbers. So there we've got the introduction. We've integrated the quote into a sentence. We've provided the in-text citation, and we've reinforced the topic idea that Lingle is not going to budge in his interaction with the girls. And by doing that, that kind of interprets the previous sentence, the quote from the critical article, and at the same time reiterates the topic idea. So there, we didn't need as many sentences to follow the steps, but we did follow all of the steps, and you want to do that every time. This will help you avoid kind of just dropping quotes into your paper, which really makes your paper confusing to read for your audience. So as you're working on any paper of literary analysis, remember these steps. What is the main idea your paper is going to discuss? Go back through your sources and identify the information that is going to inform and reinforce and support your main idea in your paper. Include that information in your paper. That's the extra step. You're going to introduce the information by giving contextual information. You're going to integrate any quoted material, which I refer to as power phrases, into your own prose. You're always going to give an in-text citation, and you're going to interpret any quoted material or any textual examples so that your audience really understands what it is that you want them to understand about the significance of the textual evidence and the quoted material. So hopefully this will be very helpful to you as you are writing your papers for this course, and you can even check your paper, look at your paper while you're watching this video. Look at every section where you have quoted material or textual examples and see if you can find where you accomplish each one of these steps. Thanks for watching.